Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, September 3rd, 2015. We sure happy it's Thursday, sure happy it's Thursday, sure happy it's Thursday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today, of course. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Don is sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. By the way, a little clarification on that phone number that you can call to listen to our show. Live, 605-562-4213, out there on the Indian lands and everything. We've even run these phone lines out to the outhouses out there. So What Really Happened is the first radio show to wire ahead for a reservation. Now then, getting on to the serious news, as you heard on the SRN news break, the wing fragment that was found in the Indian Ocean has been formally identified as coming from missing Malaysian airliner Flight 370. And it was rather amazing when that was found, and all these people coming out, oh, it's from something. It's not from the missing plane. It couldn't be from the missing plane. And I kept pointing out, there have only been 4 accidents with the Boeing 777, 3 of them on land. So if that wing component, which was already identified as coming from a 777, if that wasn't from 370, where it came from, where did it come from? And now, of course, we've got the confirmation. All right, earlier today, Donald Trump made what I think was a fatal mistake, biggest mistake of his campaign. He may have just ended his run for the White House. Amidst big pomp and ceremony up there at Laconia, New Hampshire, Trump signed this GOP pledge that he will not run as an independent if he does not wind up as the party's nominee. And it was a huge, huge mistake, in my opinion. And it shows that Trump, for all of his good points, he's very politically naive. He expects politicians are going to behave like businessmen, where your word is kind of important to continuing in business, where in politics it's exactly the opposite. The more you lie, the more you get ahead. Now, the threat of Trump running as an independent was the only protection he had against the GOP messing with him. And now that he has signed the pledge, the GOP is free to orchestrate his removal the way they did Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012. And any promises that Trump got from the GOP in return for signing this pledge are utterly worthless. And I think he just hoisted with his own petard. I think his campaign is basically over at this point. And I know this is what the GOP is planning to do, because look how hard they worked to get his signature on that piece of paper. Because now, if Trump is given the heave-ho, the way Ron Paul was, and decides he's going to run independent, the GOP can wave that paper around and say, see, he's not a man of his word. He gave us his promise. He was not going to run as an independent, and look how he's betraying the GOP. But it's the GOP that has betrayed Donald Trump. It's the GOP that has betrayed the American people, including their own rank-and-file Republicans, who want Trump, wanted Ron Paul. It's party politics at its worst, and Trump, unfortunately, is as naive about politics as Jimmy Carter was. And he got caught completely off guard by just how vicious and backstabbing and dishonest people in Washington, D.C. tend to be. And I'm sorry to see it happen. I don't know who Donald Trump has advising him on these matters, or worse, Trump isn't listening to anybody but his own ego. But I think this was the critical mistake. And from now on, we're going to see, oh, the polls are turning against Donald Trump. No, Americans are ignoring it. They're going to do exactly to Donald Trump what they did to Ron Paul. I guarantee it. It's absolutely going to happen. Donald Trump just gave away his nudge, nudge Trump card on this whole campaign. Now, we're still seeing the repercussions and fallout over the announcement that Barack Obama has enough votes pledged to him to block an overturn of his veto on the coming Iran bill. We know Congress is going to pass that bill. Most of them are in the pockets of Israel, and it just takes a simple majority to get that bill passed. But if the president vetoes it, and he's going to veto it, it takes a much higher percentage of the Congress to overturn the veto, and they can't get there. And we're seeing Israel's not giving up. They're mounting this propaganda campaign. Oh, Obama's an idiot. He's appeasing Iran. He's the new Neville Chamberlain. Iran is the new Nazi power. They're going to come and kill all of you. And, this deal to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons guarantees they'll get a nuclear weapon. I mean, it's that Orwellian out there. So, basically, there was this article over here in the Washington Times talking about how Obama is forcing this deal through over the objection of the majority of Congress and the American people. Now, there's 2 points that this particular writer fails to mention. It's no secret that the members of Congress working to kill the Iran deal are doing so at the bidding of a foreign government, Israel, bolstered by the promise of lavish campaign donations from AIPAC for next year's congressional races. Second, under the separation of powers doctrine, foreign policy is exclusively the domain of the executive branch, the sole exception being when Congress must vote to authorize a war. The P5+1 deal exists only because Israel, a nuclear-armed state that refuses to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty or allow IAEA inspections, has been claiming that Iran is just 3 months away from having a nuclear weapon. This is a claim they've been making since the 1980s. Now, it should be remembered that Israel was at the forefront of claims that Iraq had nuclear weapons, and a lot of people were killed and crippled before we learned that was a lie. And it should be remembered that Iran has not invaded another country in a war of aggression in over 200 years, a record neither Israel nor the United States can match. Now, if there's anything good coming out of this debacle, it's the American people finally understanding that Washington, D.C. is a puppet regime ruling their nation for the benefit of a foreign power, Israel. And I'm hoping Americans will remember this and force numerous career changes for most members of Congress in next year's elections. We're certainly going to be reminding everybody about that as we get closer to November of next year. Now, Netanyahu is out there trying to retroactively re-sway Congress back his way, screaming, most Americans side with Israel on Iran. You Americans, you have to side with us, not your own government, not your own conscience. And he literally came out and said an overwhelming majority of the American people sees eye to eye with Israel on the danger Iran poses. And Netanyahu, no, we don't. We ran a poll at WhatReallyHappened.com. Do you side with Israel regarding Iran? 5% yes, 95% no. And Netanyahu is desperate. He has bet his political reputation on being able to prove he is still in control of the U.S. Congress and can send your kids out to war whenever he wants to. And clearly he has not given up. He's got until the 17th to try and bribe, blackmail, coerce members of Congress to change their mind on the deal. And after that, of course, he can still do a false flag attack. Ooh, look what Iran has done. They are horrible people. Because he's not going to give up. He's bet his whole reputation and literally his career on that right now. Meanwhile, we were talking about Tom Cotton, who's over there in Israel, sucking up to them and saying, please, may I have your permission to be senator for another term? And now he's out there saying he wants to give Israel B-1 bombers, the swing-wing Lancer bombers, very effective platform. Saying, we have to protect Israel. We must protect. No, we don't. Actually, I've read the Constitution. There's nothing in there about being obligated to protect foreign countries. And George Washington warned us all in his farewell address, beware of foreign entanglements. Because it's going to lead to exactly the mess we are in right now, where a foreign government exercises control over our capital city. We got to take a break for commercials. More about Tom Cotton and the B-1 bomber after we come back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about Senator Tom Cotton, who's over there in Israel just sucking up to them as hard as he could. And he was out there promising they were going to derail the Iran deal, which now is not happening. And now he's trying to please his masters in Tel Aviv by promising that he and the rest of Congress are going to take billions and billions of tax dollars from you, the American people, and give it to poor little helpless victim Israel to fight off all the evil people around it. And they want to include B-1 bombers as well to deliver bunker busters. Now, I would like to remind, boy, we've got major rain out here, so if there's a clap of thunder and we go dead, you know why. Anyway, I'd like to remind the good senator that under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and under the Glenn Act, it is illegal for the U.S. government to send a penny of your tax dollars or weapons to any nation in possession of nuclear weapons technology that refuses to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and allow IAEA inspections, which is the case with Israel. We know they have nuclear weapons. We have the documents from South Africa. We have Mordecai Vannunu's photos. We have the recently declassified U.S. government document saying that the U.S. has helped Israel build hydrogen bombs. But the good senator seems more concerned with pleasing his masters in Tel Aviv than in obeying the laws of the nation in which he supposedly acts as a representative of we the people. When he's over there, please let me be a senator for one more term. Please, I promise we'll just loot the American people and give it all to you. Please let me be a senator. Now then, a little bit of good news for Israel. France has now closed their official Yasser Arafat murder inquiry. No charges brought. And basically, that's the end of the cover-up. They're acknowledging that Arafat was in fact murdered by polonium-210 poisoning, but we have no idea who would do something like that. Just can't figure out who would want to kill off Yasser Arafat. Complete mystery to the French. Now then, over in Kiev, things are heating up. It looks to me like the U.S. has lost patience with Poroshenko, and they're trying to get him out the same way they got his predecessor out, by fanning up the already existing resentment against Poroshenko's government, going in there, throwing hand grenades and shooting people, and try and have Kiev coup d'etat 2, the sequel. Poroshenko is already out there claiming that the Kiev grenade was all the fault of Russia, that Vladimir Putin, what an arm on that man, he pitched that grenade all the way from Moscow to Kiev. Gosh darn him. Now, on a more serious note, the U.S. Department of Justice has opened an investigation into a Ukrainian oligarch, Igor Kolomoisky. Yeah, that's it. And the reason it's unusual is Igor is very pro-Western. He's very much in favor of the U.S. having puppet control over Kiev, over Ukraine. But apparently, he basically was party to helping to steal funds being given to Ukraine by the IMF to the tune of $1.8 billion. And apparently he had help from officials in the IMF. We're going to give all this money to Kiev. We're going to take back a chunk of it and split it among ourselves. And apparently some of these IMF officials are now running and hiding and trying to find cover someplace. Now, as you know, over in China, they've had their Victory Day parade because it's not talked about much in the U.S. media and the U.S. schools. The United States likes to pretend that they won World War II all by themselves, which is absolutely not true. The U.S. didn't even get into World War II until after Russia had already put the Germans on the defensive, turning them back from Moscow. So the U.S. basically got in when the war was already clearly going to go against Germany, and so look what we did. And China suffered greatly under Japan, conquest of Manchuria, rape of Nanking, and all of that stuff. And China was very heavily involved in the war against Japan on their own soil. So yeah, they've got a right to crow about it a little bit. Now, one of the things they had on display on this Victory Day parade is this brand new DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missile. This thing is reported to have a 1,200-mile range, travel at Mach 10 during the terminal phase, which means just before the attack, and its radar is designed to seek out and specifically identify aircraft carriers. This is a game changer, especially against modern American aircraft carriers, which frankly don't work too well. Now, over in Lebanon, There's an interesting little article that was over in dailystar.com. United Nations calls on Lebanon to elect president as protests grow. This is apparently a measure that came out of the Security Council, calling on Lebanon's parliament to elect a new president to help ease a political crisis that has fueled street protests. Well, those street protests have now been outed because there's another article over an activist post where the leaders of the Lebanon protests are admitting to connections to the Western color revolution apparatus. Israel couldn't conquer Lebanon, so the U.S. goes on in and they do the same thing in Lebanon that they did in Ukraine, tried to do in Iran, did in Iran in 1953, tried to do again in 2009. Overthrow the government from within in order to install a puppet ruler. They just keep doing it, and we know that's what they're doing. The rest of the world knows that's what they're doing. So let's talk a little bit about the economy. As you probably noticed, the stock market today was not exactly stellar. It opened very high and then started to trend down, got into the red, a little bit of a goose up, got into the red again, tried to do another goose up, ended on a downturn with the Dow up 23, which is not worth celebrating, NASDAQ down 16, and they're trying to basically get the market back up and spur a buying trend, but it's not getting any traction because we all know the market has lost something like 7% since the 1st of August. And the trend, despite the occasional upshows, the trend is clearly down. And they're not going to be able to keep this little fraud going because everybody understands that these stock prices, when they get driven up, they do not reflect the underlying company's sudden productivity or profitability. The stock prices are way out of skew with what the stocks are actually worth in terms of earnings ability. The market is hideously overvalued from decades of manipulation. It's more overvalued today than it was going into October 1929. When we come back, one mechanism by which the market was goosed. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about the economy, and a major reason the European stock market jumped up overnight, which led to a brief soaring of the American stock market before gravity reasserted itself, is that Mario Draghi is dropping hints that they're going to increase their quantitative easing program. He didn't actually say they were going to do it. He's rumor mongering. Okay? And so what actually happened is the stock market did not go up because the underlying businesses are doing any better, but because of the promise and rumor of more instant money being poured all over the financial corporations to play with. And they're basically trying to make the economies look like they're still functioning. But we all know that the stock markets and equities markets and all of that are not only being massively rigged, they're completely disconnected from the real economy of the various nations. Now, over at CalSTRS, which is the nation's second largest pension fund, they have $191 billion in assets. The only fund larger than them is CalPERS. And the Wall Street Journal is saying that this second largest pension fund is going to dump 12% of their stock holdings in order to isolate itself from another downturn. And a block of stock like that being dumped is going to create the downward trend. The trend is not, my friend. All right, let's see. We're going to go ahead and grab a phone call here. Andrew in New York. Aloha, Andrew. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, you always said that the dollar is like danger of being replaced as like the world currency, like another currency might replace it, but isn't the dollar like 10 times like has more printing power than any other currency, and like basically all the other currencies are basically fiat currencies around the world?
Well, the U.S. dollar is also a fiat currency. The only thing that really backs it is the promise of future slave labor of American workers to redeem all the treasury bonds.
Yeah, that's true. Also, like, even though some currencies in the world are gold backed, there's a difference between gold backed and gold redeemable.
Well, the fact that they're gold backed means that at some point they can be redeemable in gold. because that's a commodity-based currency it's a unit of value as opposed to a unit of debt, and that is really the fundamental difference between the dollar as it was originally adopted by the United States, where it was a unit of value based on the silver content of the silver coins, versus our current U.S. Federal Reserve note, which is basically a piece of paper loaned at interest into circulation.
Also, isn't the U.S. government, going after people who use alternative currencies? Like, if there's any other source, but Bitcoin, they don't seem to do it with that.
Well, they're trying to. There is no legal foundation that says Americans cannot use any medium of exchange they choose. If you've got two people willing to carry on commerce with white seashells, legally it's allowed to do. That nobody will actually take it outside that little group. But this is how community currencies and town currencies operate. The only currency that is mandated as being acceptable universally across the country is the Federal Reserve note. But it doesn't say it's the only medium of exchange. They'd like to make it that way. And it was kind of nice the other week to hear that the federal government has finally backed off the Liberty Dollar and started returning the silver and gold coins to the people that they belong to. And it was a nonsensical situation anyway, trying to claim that the Liberty Dollar was an attempt at counterfeiting because it had the word dollar on it, because a lot of coins have dollar on them. A lot of paper currencies have dollar. Zimbabwe was using the word dollar. Dollar is not the copyrighted trademark property of the Federal Reserve. In fact, it goes all the way back to the German silver mines in Thaler, Germany, which started the practice of uniform weight of silver product, which became reliable as a recognized unit of value for trade. And that was basically from the German silver mines to the early U.S. government. That's what the dollar was, a weight measure of silver. And once you had it in your hand, there wasn't a thing the bankers or the government could do that could change its value. And unfortunately, we lost that the year after John F. Kennedy was killed, when the silver content was taken out of our coins. And basically, they're just gas station game tokens now.
About the debt, people say we're 19 trillion at debt, with unfunded liabilities. Isn't the real debt hundreds of trillions of dollars?
It is, the last number I had that seemed reasonable was 230 trillion. But they don't want you to know about it. The reality is there's a treasury bond bubble. There are not enough Americans paying taxes to ever redeem all those treasury bonds. And they can't keep it going, because the inherent nature of the private central banking arrangement is that debt is always going to grow faster than the available money supply until the aggregate debt crushes the system. And that's exactly what's happening all over the world right now.
And I think the private central bankers, they don't want to pay that. That's why they want to get a bloody war with Russia and China, so they could give people an excuse to start all over again.
Well, they're not going to start all over again. The whole purpose of a war is to plunge the nation and the people into even deeper debt and make it look like it's their own idea. Because from private central bank to war is a three-step process. The first step is you issue all the public currencies a loan at interest. You get the people into debt until the people stop borrowing because they can't service the debt they've got. And at that point, the Keynesians come in and demand that governments start borrowing on behalf of the people, and without their permission, I might add, to keep that little pyramid going. And then when you reach the point where the people won't borrow anymore and the government can't borrow anymore, that's when the wars are started, because at that point everybody says, well, we have to borrow more money now. We must buy weapons to fight the war, and after the war is over, we have to borrow more to rebuild. And when it's all over, ordinary people have kind of what they had before, except the graveyards are a lot bigger, and we're back in debt slavery to the private central banks for another 100 years.
It's kind of funny, this economist, Paul Krugman, who's basically writes for the New York Times. He said the reason why the economy is doing as bad is because we need to get in more debt with the private central bank.
Well, Krugman would say that. I mean, he's part of the priesthood of this religion called private central banking.
All right, thanks, Michael.
All right, thank you very much. And remember, anybody who says the solution is to go deeper into debt, what they're doing is condemning future generations of Americans to poverty, hardship, and debt slavery. But these people inside the banks don't care. the people who set up the Federal Reserve, knew in the long run it was going to bring tremendous suffering to the nation. But they don't care. They know there's this heaven and hell nonsense is meaningless. They wanted lives of wealth, comfort, privilege, and influence, and they went to their graves happy. Because when it finally falls apart, it's somebody else's problem. Now, Mark Faber, editor of the Boom and Doom Report, was on Bloomberg TV saying that there are no more safe assets anymore. And he's talking about the equities market, the paper market. He says the time has come to focus on precious metals. Silver, obviously, gold, obviously, platinum if you can afford it, tantalum, any strategic materials. I wouldn't waste my time with copper just yet, but who knows what's going to happen when this stuff starts taking off. Especially if there's a war. Copper is going to be in huge demand. Remember, during World War II, there was 1 year they actually issued steel Lincoln pennies because the copper was needed for jacketing on bullets and bombs and the rest of it. That could all happen again. Over at Kitco News, Peter Schiff is saying there is no Fed rate hike coming. They were never planning on doing it. It was just more propaganda to make it look like they're trying to get inflation under control. They can't. They won't. It's impossible. The system has gone completely out of balance, and all we can do is wait and watch the show while it tears itself apart. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I'm looking at Fox News right now, and they are pounding the war drums as hard as they can. They're talking about Chinese warships off the coast of Alaska. There's a Russian sub near Georgia. Now, little point of clarification. All this is taking place in international waters, and the United States sends their ships up to the coast of China and Russia all the time, but they're trying to make it look like this is a provocation. How dare those Chinese people sail their ships up there in the Bering Straits? Everybody's in the Bering Straits. Russia's in the Bering Straits. China's in the Bering Straits. The crab fishermen in the Bering Straits. It's international waters. But they're out there banging the drum because the U.S. government understands if they don't get World War III started for real before the economy implodes, the American people are going to point the finger of blame where it deserves to go, Wall Street and Washington, D.C. And so they're out there saying, Russia's bad, China's bad, we've got to have war. And it's being accelerated, of course, by the fact that more and more countries are now turning away from the U.S. dollar. And apparently Russia is passing a law that will formally dump the U.S. dollar from all commerce. And it will be eliminated from all trade between Russia, including Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. And here's where it gets really, really interesting. The Japan Bank for International Cooperation's Senior Managing Director has said that they are transitioning to ruble-yen swaps because using the U.S. dollar in overseas over-border transactions has become too difficult because of the Western anti-Russia sanctions. Talk about hoisting with your own petard. So it's the dollar's fall from global dominance. It's only going to accelerate from here, especially because of all this instant money creation out of thin air to keep pouring all over Wall Street. It was never going to end well. They're caught between a rock and a hard place. They can stop inflating the U.S. dollar and let Wall Street implode, or they can go on propping up Wall Street and inflate the value of the dollar away. It's seen as unreliable by a lot of people. I noticed in a couple of cases where back when I was still working with my animation business and I was doing business with other countries, and they'd send an estimate and say, this estimate's only good for a couple of weeks and you got to pay up front because we're going to have to quickly change the currency or we could lose money as the dollar continues to fall. All righty, we're going to start taking some phone calls here. John in Chicago. Aloha, John. Thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Yeah, the right, the Republicans, they're going out of their way to demonize the Democrats and Obama, for this Iran deal.
Yes.
And saying that he's anti-Israel, but the truth be told, if they were really anti-Israel, there wouldn't be a Syrian refugee crisis right now, would there? Because going back to when he started on Libya, Mr. Nobel Peace Prize winner and everything else. I mean, you know, he's going along with Israel's program for a greater Israel. They're just expelling these people out of these countries so they can take that land.
Well, in the case of Syria,
so I'm getting real tired of the hypocrisy.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, certainly Israel's made no secret that they want to grab a larger piece of Syria for themselves. The issues in Syria are a little more complex and multidimensional than just that, but certainly that's got a lot to do with it. Now, one of the things that really annoys me about Israel is how the U.S., through subversion, blackmail, bribe, whatever, has been this incredible support to Israel all these years. And the first time there's a little resistance, Israel screaming, oh, you're anti-Semites, you hate us, you've betrayed us, you've turned your back on us. It's like this attitude of, we don't care about all the trillions of dollars and weapons and everything you gave us over the last 60 years. We don't care about the fact that you actually sacrificed a lot of your own people to stop the Nazis from completing whatever it is we're being told they were trying to complete. What have you done for us today? And if you haven't done for us today, then obviously you're anti-Semitic Jew haters who want Hitler to come back and gas Jewish babies in the ovens. And this perpetual ingratitude and sense of permanent entitlement at the expense of the rest of the world, I think it's really starting to wear thin on most people around the world.
Well, and like you said, I mean, what is the ink on the paper of the Iran deal worth if Israel pulls a dirty bomb stunt? I mean, once Assad is bounced from power, if they get Assad out like they did Gaddafi and anybody else, then they're going to say it's time to start on Iran. I mean, this is the program going forward, and I don't care if it's Democrat or Republican. All three of those candidates we got right now, Jeb, Hillary, and Donald Trump, all three of them will complete the job for Israel because that's what the United States is. We're a mercenary force for a greater Israel right now.
No, it's not mercenary. It's not mercenary. It's not mercenary. Little clarification. Congress is selling your children as slaves to service of a foreign government. Let's call it what it is. Slavery has returned to the United States of America, and I'm not just talking about that 1040 form. I'm talking about how Congress is selling your children to serve in Israel's wars on all their enemies, along with the fact that all of us are having to surrender vast sums of money to pay for all the bullets and bombs and B-1 bombers that Tom Cotton wants to give them. And it really is completely out of control. Now, my position is that the government does not have either a legal or moral right to send a penny to any foreign nation while we have Americans sleeping in alleys and eating out of trash bins in this country. That's my position on that.
The deceptive conscription of our troops, right?
Yeah, they're just being sold off. You know, here we'll take another 20,000 of our kids and we'll fling them against Iraq and Iran and the rest of it in exchange for very hefty campaign donations. Whoa. Well,
jump on Twitter with me if you get some time and help us, because there's a lot of people that are just taking it out on the Syrian refugees, and you need to go back to the cause of the problem. The cause of the problem is that America is going after Assad, and they've been trying to do it, like you said, for 4 years, and now it's full on. They've got ISIS on the ground, and they got airstrikes from the Royal Air Force and all the West on top of it, and there wouldn't be a crisis if these people were anti-Israel. That's my position.
All right, well, that's my position as well here. We're going to let you go and very quickly try and grab Steve in California before the top of the hour news break. What's on your mind?
Well, let me clarify something, I guess, and see if maybe we're on agreement on it, but isn't it the goal of the U.S. central bankers is to pretty much keep everybody in kind of a debt situation, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if keeping that in mind, what's not stop them from these countries that want to pull away from the dollar, extending more credit, getting them more in debt, in order for them to say, well, we'll stay on the hard currency of the U.S. dollar. They'll just extend more credit. It's kind of a blackmail situation. They're not doing well also financially, their economies, and so they just simply extend more credit to keep them on the U.S. dollar.
Well, the problem with that is you can't buy a whole heck of a lot with the U.S. dollar anymore. Other countries aren't trading in it. America's lost its manufacturing. The products that America makes are poor quality and overpriced, and nobody wants our agriculture.